Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be showing you guys what I believe to be the best rogue build in the game if you're interested in just absolutely blasting all the way to level 100, and you just want to speed farm nightmare dungeons like a complete psycho. The build is pretty much good for anything in the game. You can very easily do more than enough boss damage to kill a lot of the uber bosses, but the main point of this build is actually to just speed clear. It is more optimized for doing things extremely quickly, and it is an absolutely insane amount of fun to just level up with, and it doesn't really need all that much gear investment to get into it. This build isn't really meant for doing like super high nightmare dungeons. You definitely can set it up for that, and it is capable of that. You just need pretty optimized gear in order to do so, but the main point of the build is to just be as quick as humanly possible. I'll be posting a perfected version of the build once I have much better gear and I have it set up more for tier 100s, etc. So feel free to subscribe if you're interested in that, but this build is mainly just to get you guys all the way up to level 100 and to have something that you can speed farm all of your glyphs with. Also, if you guys are interested in a boss killing build, leave it down in the comments. You can do up to well over 20 million damage per poison tick with a perfectly set up boss build, which is pretty insane, and this is without abusing the Tibalt's Will condemnation bug. If you're interested, just leave a comment down below and I can post that tomorrow. Today's video is sponsored by Geology, which offers a ton of high quality skin and hair care products with over 7,000 5-star reviews. You know you can trust Geology to drastically improve not only your skin and hair health, but also just how downright awful you smell after playing Diablo for 20 hours straight with their super clean body wash and natural deodorants. Using the link below, you can take a personalized quiz that will create the perfect routine customized just for you that's super simple to follow and extremely effective. Personally, I'm a massive fan of the aluminum-free deodorant. It smells great, it doesn't wear off super quick, and the dark eye circle treatment is an absolute must-have for me because of all the late nights I spend grinding Diablo like a psycho. For a limited time, you can get a massive 70% off their skincare trial set if you use my link, but you'll also get an additional offer for up to 30% off of any add-ons with your purchase, so make sure to check out the link in the description and fix your degenerate gamer hygiene today. Alright, getting into the build, this is a pretty standard Twisting Blades rogue build. You'll see a lot of people using combo points and not using Death Trap right now, which is definitely a viable option if you're more interested in that, but for speed farming and leveling up, we have more than enough damage to where combo points isn't really necessary, and I prefer to take advantage of Death Trap paired with Preparation. When you do this, anytime that you use your ultimate skill, it's going to refresh the cooldown of all of our other skills, namely Shadow Imbuement, which is insane for speed clearing. So effectively what we can do is pop a Shadow Imbuement, go into a pack, suck everything together with Death Trap, and further reduce the cooldown of our Death Trap by spending a crazy amount of energy per second. And then the second that we use our Death Trap, we get our Shadow Imbuement back again. So basically, we're able to just jump into a pack, nuke the entire pack down, and then get all of our cooldowns back so that we can go into the next pack and then nuke it down again. This is the main point of the build. I'm not using Shadow Step anymore because we have Permanent Unstoppable via one of the vampiric powers, and I have substituted in Poison Imbuement so that we can do a lot of damage to bosses and very high health elites. One of the main downsides of this build previously was that your single target damage was pretty weak, but you can very easily add in Poison Imbuement, which is very insane right now, and get a lot of that single target damage. Again, this build is not meant for doing tier 100 nightmare dungeons or one-shotting Uber Duriel or anything, but you can actually get a pretty insane amount of poison damage if you want to build more into that, and you can easily do tier 100s with it if you optimize for a lot of survivability, which I'll get into. My gear isn't very good right now, and the way that I have the build set up is mainly for like speed farming, but I'll get into all the different variations that you guys can achieve. So when it comes to the skill tree, we go with Puncture for the vulnerable application on single target. We go Twisting Blades, obviously, and then it's up to you whether or not you want to do Improved or Advanced. Advanced is good for some cooldown reduction, but it is pretty nerfed. Improved is good for survivability because you can just guarantee daze everything. Or not daze everything, but guarantee daze elites that you're fighting. It's really just up to you. 3 points into Sturdy for damage reduction, and then we just do 1 point to Dash, literally just for the mobility. And again, we don't need Shadow Step anymore because we have Permanent Unstoppable by just pressing spacebar, which I'll get into. 3 into Exploit and 3 into Malice, and then I have 2 points into Shadow Imbuement, and then going into Mixed Shadow Imbuement. Early on, you want to go Blended for the vulnerable, but once you get the Exploit glyph, you want to swap to Mixed for 12% increased non-phys damage, and then you get Consuming Shadows. This is insane, and one of the main reasons that Shadow Imbuement paired with Death Trap is such a fantastic combo, because you're constantly killing stuff with shadow damage, and you're constantly resetting the cooldown on your Shadow Imbuement so that you can kill more stuff, and then your energy is basically solved with Consuming Shadows. Plus a couple other things, you just have a ridiculous amount of energy, and because you have so much energy, you can spam Twisting Blades like crazy, and then get even more cooldown reset on Death Trap. So that's how we're able to have Death Trap active so often. And then we have a bunch of points into Poison Imbuement. We have 5 here, and then another 3 with our amulet. And we go into blended, just so poison does significantly more damage. 3 points into precision for crit chance, and then 3 into frigid finesse if you have penitent greaves. If you don't have penitent greaves, you just don't go that. 3 into innervation for a chance to gain some energy. You do lucky hit quite often, but this is pretty optional, but very early on into the build, it's pretty good. Trap mastery for 12% crit chance all the time because we're constantly propping our death trap. Aftermath is great for just 90 energy. I mainly use this on single target because you're not killing stuff on single target to get the energy back. So usually what I'll do when fighting a boss is I'll pop 2 poison imbuments, twisting blades, twisting blades, twisting blades, and then I'll death trap, and then that'll instantly give me 90 energy, and then I can poison imbuement again, and then after a few more twisting blades cast, the boss will literally just fall over. And then we have some points into haste for movement speed and attack speed, which is really good. And the movement speed will also turn into more attack speed with a vampire power. And then we have close quarters combat, which is unbelievably busted, giving us a total of 152% multiplicative damage because we are stacking a bunch of crowd control damage. And we also get 20% attack speed with this just by making sure to use puncture every 10 seconds or something, which we need to do anyways for some damage reduction. When it comes to our vampire powers, these are pretty important. Undying is unbelievably insane for just getting you a lot of healing. If you notice that your survivability is really good, you could take this off, and then you could even put 3 points into siphoning strikes instead if you wanted to get a bit of healing. But Undying is just an infinitely better version of siphoning strikes, basically. And I keep it on pretty much at all times. And then I have Metamorphosis. This gives us pretty much permanent unstoppable anytime that we just press spacebar. And the reason that this is very good is because when you have the Tybalt Will Pants, you gain 40% multiplicative damage just by using your spacebar, but you also get the Unstoppable paired with the Metamorphosis vampire power, and you get 50 energy anytime you become unstoppable. So you pretty much just spacebar every 4 seconds. It also puts a curse on stuff, which is pretty nice, and you get the damage bonus pretty much all the time. And in my opinion, this is way more consistent than using Shadow Step, but you could use Shadow Step if you prefer and you don't want to have to go get Metamorphosis. Then we have Ravenous, which is by far the best vampire power. You get up to 80% attack speed based on your movement speed, and Rogue has a pretty easy time getting a lot of movement speed. So by default, just standing here, this is giving me a 64% attack speed bonus. So that is extremely powerful for us. And then I use Anticipation to further reduce the cooldown on Death Trap. It reduces it by about 10 seconds just by using this, so we get way more Death Traps. And the more Death Traps that we get, the more Shadow Imbuements and the more Poison Imbuements that we get, as well as dashes. So it just really helps with, the speed clearing portion of the build. And then we have Flowing Veins for 60% increased damage over time when we are using Poison Imbuement, and we can guarantee apply this Vampire Curse via Metamorphosis by just dodging on single targets, but most normal enemies will count as moving, so you'll pretty much always get this damage increase. If you want some survivability, Resilience is unbelievably insane, and I'd recommend taking off either Anticipation or Flowing Veins if you're having any sort of survivability issues whatsoever. Just take one of these off and put on Resilience. This will dramatically increase your survivability. It's a crazy amount of damage reduction. But currently, I'm not really in the need of that. But if I was to do like a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon, I would certainly swap off probably Anticipation in favor of Resilience. Let's talk about legendaries and unique. So I already mentioned Tybalt's Will, which is fantastic for just giving you additional 40% damage. Currently, this is bugged with combo points plus Condemnation, but we are not taking advantage of that, and that will likely get patched. Basically, the maximum resource of this actually gives you maximum combo points, and then if you use Condemnation, it has a chance to proc all 23 of those combo points if you have a max roll, to where you just do infinitely more damage. We're not using that right now, and that will definitely just get patched. This is just for extra damage. If you wanted more survivability, or you just don't have these, it's really not a big deal. I mean, 40% damage is really, really good, right? But you're missing a lot of survivability not having a normal legendary pair of pants. So if you wanted to do tier 100, for example, you would take these off. Penitent Greaves is fantastic for just additional damage. We stack so much damage versus crowd controlled with the build here. In blind, I have 380% currently. Penitent Greaves basically makes it to where you can just always take advantage of this, and you want to stack so much of this because 40% of it gets converted into multiplicative damage via close quarters combat. Penitent Greaves drops off of Varshan as well as Grigori, so you can just get this very, very easily, and you also get a little bit of extra damage, but constantly applying crowd control is great for, again, the damage versus crowd control, the cheap shot board, and the Paragon, as well as giving you a lot of umbral energy. So you lose a lot of damage not using Penitent Greaves, but I have played around with Flicker Step, and it is a crazy amount of fun with this build. And if you're doing stuff that's really low level, you will definitely clear faster with Flicker Step because you just wouldn't need the damage from Penitent Greaves, and you just dodge like crazy, and you can constantly just spam Death Trap. It's a crazy amount of fun, and Flicker Step is very easy to get from Uber Duriel. But if you wanted more survivability, you could just use normal legendary boots and just get a lot of resistance as well as movement speed. But in order to get the most amount of damage, Penitent Greaves is definitely the strat. Outside of that, our legendary stuff is pretty standard. You want to go Blade Dancers on the two-hander. If you just want to fully build into Poison, you actually want Blade Dancer on like gloves or something, because Poison is bugged and gets the full value out of this. But for general clearing, you want Twisting Blades on the two-hander. And then on the amulet, I would probably go with Accelerating. And then on gloves, you want to go for Corruption. I have Corruption on my amulet right now because this is my boss killing amulet. So it massively increases the damage of Poison, as well as Shadow Movement though, which is pretty good for clearing. But for clearing, I'd probably go with Accelerating on the amulet. And then to get a ton of extra resource, you get Ravenous, which is codexable, and then you can also get Umbral Ring. Umbral is great, obviously, when you pair it with Penitent Greaves, as well as Twisting Blades has a chance to daze. That's particularly good. And then you can just get some generic stuff like Edge Masters for extra damage. And then I have Bursting Venoms. This really doesn't proc that much, and our build doesn't lean too heavily into poison, but when this does proc on a boss, you'll just instantly melt them. Alternatively, you could get the Imprintable Codex power that upon using energy, you have a chance to stun enemies. That's pretty good for survivability because you end up stunning stuff pretty frequently. But I just have this for the chance to, every once in a while, it'll proc and I'll just absolutely nuke a boss. Or if like the Butcher shows up, it's really nice to have this. Keep in mind though that Bursting Venoms is bugged with combo points, so you get way more value out of this when you're playing with combo points, which again, we are not playing with. Next to that, you just want to get 2 defensive legendaries. So you want to get Aspect of Might, and then you want for 20% damage reduction anytime you use a basic skill. And then you want to get Disobedience so that you can cap out your armor. If you're noticing that you want even more survivability, a great way to do that paired with Penitent Greaves is to put the Cheats aspect on your amulet for 36% less damage from crowd-controlled enemies, and it also gives you movement speed. So if you wanted more survivability, I would just ditch Bursting Venoms, and I would put Corruption on your weapon or something, and then I'd put Cheats on the amulet with some more defensive stats, and you get a crazy amount of defense just from this one legendary. Or if you just didn't want to use Tybalt, you could just put Cheats aspect on a normal pair of pants, and then just, keep it how it is. When it comes to the stats on gear, my stats are pretty bad, but let's just go over it. So on the helmet, you want ranks to poison imbuement. If you want to build into that, you get 4 ranks, so that's a lot of extra damage with your poison, but that's mainly only going to help you when you're bossing, because the majority of the time, our damage is mainly going to come from Shadow Imbuement as well as Death Trap, and Poison Imbuement is just there for like tanky elites and bosses. Outside of that, the helmet can get a lot of good defense stuff. Cooldown reduction I don't really think is all that necessary because you have enough via preparation, so I'd prefer to get all the defense here, such as total armor percent is very good, get like 1 or 2 resistances, and then max HP is fantastic, as well as the ranks of Poison Imbuement. On the chest, mine is really not great. I'm not a big fan of it. You want to get total armor percent capped out so that you can cap out your armor. And then you want to get straight up damage reduction from close enemies, and then 1 resistance that you're missing out on so you can cap out your resistances. On your gloves, you want to get crit chance, attack speed, ranks of Twisting Blades, and then trap skill cooldown reduction. Lucky hit chance to restore resource is pretty nice, but it is not really all that good, and your resource is perfectly fine as long as you have Ravenous as well as an Umbral Ring. Pants, you can go to Bolt, or if you want normal pants, you would just want damage reduction from close, max HP, and some sort of resistance. Same thing on boots, you would want to get movement speed, energy cost reduction, or just triple resistance, and you could cap out your resistance with a normal pair of boots, but you lose a lot of damage not having Penitent. On your two-hander or even just your daggers, you want to have a crossbow because it has inherent vulnerable damage, which is still better than a bow. And then you want to get dexterity, all stats, damage to close, and then damage to crowd controlled. Damage to crowd controlled, keep in mind that 40% of this value turns into a multiplicative bonus, which is very good. And the same thing on your daggers. You want all stats, dex, damage to close, and damage to crowd controlled. You want pretty much all of your weapons to look exactly like this one. This is very good, and you want to have daggers because they roll close range damage, and they roll with higher attack speed than swords do, and the crit damage from swords is pretty weak. Just make sure to equip whatever is a 925, and make sure that you're killing world bosses so you get 925 daggers or swords, but the crossbow does not need to be 925. When it comes to your rings, there's a lot of good stats you can get. At the least, I would get crit chance, damage to crowd controlled, and then you could either get vulnerable damage, damage to close, max HP for survivability, or even resource generation. I found that I don't really need resource gen, and I'd prefer to just get more damage. So crit chance is really, really good, and then damage to crowd control would be second. Outside of that, like I said, vulnerable, damage to close, those are some pretty good stats to look out for. Lucky hit chance is good for bursting venoms, but this build isn't really leaning too hard into poison. It's kind of just there. On the amulet, there's a crazy amount of stuff that you can get. Energy cost reduction and movement speed, I would say, are your two best things for overall damage. Movement speed, because that converts into ravenous attack speed, which is good, and it also just increases your clear speed. Energy cost reduction is great, so you can just spam more twisting blades. Mine only cost 24 right now. Ranks and imbuement skills is really good for poison as well as shadow imbuement, just increase its damage, obviously. Imbuement skill cooldown reduction, I'm not really a fan of. I'd rather have normal cooldown reduction, or I'd probably prefer to have straight up like damage reduction, total armor, or you could even get ranks to like Frigid Finesse or ranks to Exploit or Malice would be pretty good. There's a ton of stuff that you can get on the amulet, so just look out for some of those things that I mentioned. When it comes to your survivability and capping out your resistances, the best way to do so is making sure that you have total armor percent on at least 2 pieces of gear, so that you want to have around 8 to 10k base armor, depending upon which level of content that you're doing. But if you're just fighting enemies around your level, having like 70% reduced physical damage as a baseline is good, because then you pair it with disobedience and you're more than capped out. But if you're trying to do higher nightmare dungeons, you want your armor to be, a base of 10k at least, and then pair it with disobedience, and then you are definitely armor capped with mobs like 50 levels higher than you. Next to that, you just want to make sure to get like 1 or 2 resist rolls on your helmet and your chest, and then you can pretty easily fill out your resistances by having gems in, and then you can get a bit of resistance in the Paragon board. When it comes to the Paragon board, you want to have it set up differently based on your level. I'll have a link in the description for a leveling one and a level 100 version. When you're leveling, you want to put closer into the first glyph slot for the damage reduction and extra cutthroat skill damage. Keep in mind though that cutthroat skill damage does not work for poison, but obviously it will work for normal twisting blades and shadow imbuement. Currently, I have Exploit here, which is mainly just to apply vulnerable guaranteed, because we do have a lot of extra damage versus vulnerable, and you'd actually want to put that in the second glyph slot while you're leveling, which is the no witness board. Currently, I have versatility here, which increases our imbuement damage by 15%, and is buffing our max HP by putting it in this glyph, which is in this board, which is pretty good. And then I have the Tricks of the Trade board with Turf for 10% damage reduction and some damage to close, and a bit of DR here. And then I have Control absolutely maxed out in the Exploit Weakness board, a bit of vulnerable damage here. Getting Control maxed out in level 21 is by far the best glyph, because it, again, 40% of this gets turned into multiplicative damage. So literally just from this, I'm getting roughly 46 or something percent multiplicative damage just from this one glyph. And when enemies are chilled, I get 10% more, which they are chilled with Penitent Greaves. And then I have Cheap Shot board, 25% damage multi pretty much all the time, because we have Penitent Greaves on. And then you get a ton of damage versus crowd controlled, which again scales into close quarters combat damage. And then I have Efficacy here, so that our imbuments have 20% increased damage, and we also get 28% increased damage to crowd controlled, which is again scaled into multiplicative via close quarters combat. And then lastly, I have Closer in this board. What is this even called? Leyrana's Instinct. I have it in this board just because I get a little bit of extra resistance to all elements, which I pretty like, which I'm a fan of. It helps me cap out my resists, and also I just get a little bit of dex here. If you wanted to play with combo points, you would ditch this last glyph and you would just swap out versatility and put Closer somewhere else, and then you would spec into Tricks of the Trade, and then you could fill out some other slots with a little bit more damage. But this is the way that I have it set up, and what I found to work pretty well. When it comes to playing with the build, it's pretty much a standard rogue build. The main thing you want to take advantage of is the fact that preparation resets all of your cooldowns. So when you go into a pack, you want to first press Shadow Imbuement and then Death Trap, and then you want to use 2 or 3 Twisting Blades. Hopefully by then the entire pack will explode. If it hasn't, you can decide to add a Poison Imbuement if there is a tanky elite, or you can just add another Shadow Imbuement and cast 2 more times. And then in between that, you pretty much just spam Twisting Blades, spam Dash, spam an Imbuement, and then at some point you will have used so much energy you'll have spent so that you get your Death Trap back. You want to use your Death Trap in highly populated areas so it sucks in more enemies. And that's pretty much it. The build is pretty easy to play with. If you've played Rogue before, you know the drill. I'll make an updated version of this once I have it a little bit more perfected and a tier 100 variant. And again, let me know down in the comments if you're interested in a boss killing version of the build. But that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.